red deck list, as that is your specialty, Mr. Basic Mountain. And I'll see here that Tyler does have 2 copies of Pearl Ancient as his win condition here in his blue-black control deck. He also has an Ugin hanging out, too. A bunch of removals, some discards, some counter spells. We've seen blue-black before, though blue-black against mono-red is not something we typically see, so this should be interesting. You have to imagine Tyler's deck is built to be able to beat these Siege Rhino decks. You wonder what this matchup looks like.
Well, he's got some highs and some lows. Tyler's got access to Bioblight that's very good here. Crux of Fate, if he can get to it, is quite powerful. And then he's got a lot of inefficient cards like Ugin, he's got Thought Seizes, he's got Dissolve. So I think the best portions of his deck are quite good against Drew, but the lower half of his deck is very bad.
Dismal Backwater is not a bad start. Arndt will go up to 21. He's got a Thoughtseize, so he's going to go down to 19. Levin going to show a hand of 2 mountains. Stoke the Flames ×2, a Hammer Hand, and a copy of a Crone Crusader. So leading out with a Frenzied Goblin to start.
So this is actually very good news for Tyler here, because if he has one piece of creature removal, he can take the Crusader with the Thoughtseize. He can then kill the Frenzied Goblin, and Drew's hand is a creature enchantment and some burn spells, with Tyler at a fairly high life total.
There's a Temple of Deceit to follow up. Tyler will put that card to the bottom, and we're going to head back Levin's way. Levin will draw a card. It's a copy of a Crone Crusader. Rather timely there for Drew, is able to play that, and now deploy a copy of Hammer Hand and also get a token. So a very favorable draw step, to say the least.
Well, it turned Tyler's Thoughtseize from awesome to close to a mulligan.
Yeah, and 2 damage as well.
Yeah, that was the perfect draw there for Drew.
And now he gets to get in the red zone here as well, because the Crusader has haste now thanks to Hammer Hand. And now this game has certainly changed, and I'm doing the check now. Is there any way that Tyler has main deck copies of Drown in Sorrow? And no. No, he does not.
And now Tyler's playing against an opponent with 2 copies of Stoke of Flames in his hand as well.
Yes, he is.
So
things have gotten rather ugly here for Mr. Arndt. Now, he does have a copy of Bioblight in his hand. You can see that here, and he's looking to figure out if he wants to cast it now or perhaps wait, but he will cast it to get the Crone Crusader off the board, which I do think is smart, passing the turn back over to Levin. We know Levin has 2 copies of Stoke the Flames in his hand, as he does take a draw step. Picks up a copy of Dragon's Mantle.
Dragon's Mantle, a great draw here.
You have to imagine the Ghost Scooter class to cast this, so he will on the Frenzied Goblin. That will cantrip. Mantle, just a great card in his red decks, too.
Anytime that you get Dragon's Mantle allows you to get it even 1 free point of damage, it's quite valuable. And there's going to be games where it does a lot more work than that.
And this might be one of those games. Could have a healthy attack here this turn if he'd like to for 1, 2, 3, 4 points of damage if he uses all of his mana, but it looks like he's going to deploy a Swift Spear as well. And now he'll come into the red zone with everybody. The nice thing here for Levin, as he does pump 1 with the Dragon Mantle, still being attack here for 4 points of damage, is he doesn't have to really fear a sweeper on 4. There's no damnation.
Yep.
You know, if Tyler wants to tap out to cast a card like Perilous Vault, well, by all means, feel free.
Yeah, with Drew having 2 copies of Stoke the Flames in hand, he gets 1 big hit in. Tyler uses the Perilous Vault, and it's going to be very hard to beat Drew's follow-up.
Arndt does have a 4th land there in a swamp. You can see his hand. He does have a dig through time over there. Looks like he may have his main deck copy of Silence the Believers in his hand at this point, but those are all slow removal spells that are, again, great against your Siege Rhino decks of the world, but this one's a little too low to the ground.
Exactly. I was going to mention the same thing. Tyler's hand is great against most decks in the format here. He's got card draw, he's got removal, a Thoughtseize, but Drew is just trying to make the game about something else entirely, and it's going to be hard for Tyler to beat this game 1.
There is Silence the Believers. Very powerful, but not terribly efficient. It does remove all the auras from the game as well, so Dragon's Mantle does have to be exiled. Levin will draw his card. See how much more damage he can push across here. This blue control deck can gain a little bit of life thanks to Dismal Backwater and Radiant Fountain. 2 copies of Radiant Fountain here in Arndt's list. And in combination with Pearl Ancient, if it ever gets to that point, it does close the door on the red decks, but the red decks never want to go that late.
And now Drew's does have to concern himself with Crux of Fate, though.
Yep.
Now that's online, and that's going to inform some of his decision-making here.
Here's a Hammer Hand. That'll trigger Prowess as well. So some damage will be pushed across here. And as you mentioned, Crux of Fate does have to be on the radar.
But I like this play from Drew. The goal this turn has to be to get Tyler down to 8 or less, as that sets the stage for the 2 Stoke the Flames in your hand to finish things off. Even if you get hit by Crux of Fate in the worst case scenario.
Bloodstained Mire is the land there for Tyler, and he will just pass the turn back. And it's interesting because, you know, Bloodstained Mire in most cases when playing blue control, that doesn't matter. I just want to get a card in the graveyard. It doesn't really matter that I'm losing a life to do so, but against the red deck, it certainly does.
Yep. You get to punish people who are trying to do a lot for the mid-range mirror matches. And as you mentioned, Bloodstained Mire, it looks innocuous, but it's definitely there to help in most mid-range matchups where your life total doesn't matter, but being able to delve more efficiently matters quite a bit.
And I think about Jim Davis's take on blue-white control, where not only does he have additional fetch lands, but he has a card like Evolving Wilds in his deck.
Yeah, he's trying very hard to fill up his graveyard for free. But the very fast beatdown decks of the format can punish you for doing that sort of thing.
Levin going to think things through on this turn. He is playing against an opponent that does have a lot of open mana. That can represent quite a few things here for blue-black control, removal, or counter spells. But it looks like the easiest place to start is just an attack here with the Swift Spear, leaving a creature back to convoke the Stoke of Flames.
Yeah, and now the jig is up on both sides of the table here. Drew's at least appearing to commit this turn to Stoke the Flames almost no matter what happens.
Here is a copy of Hero's Downfall to go after the Swift Spear. A card we oftentimes see in Legacy, though not sure how much now due to the banning of Treasure Cruise. Perhaps that blue-red Delver deck is no longer relevant, so maybe its home will be in Standard.
Perhaps. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot more Tarmogoyfs in Legacy post-Treasure Cruise ban. And this card's not very good against Tarmogoyf.
Levin going to take the opportunity to cast Stoke the Flames now, while Arndt only has one blue mana available there in Dismal Backwater. Does have to be wary of a card like Dissolve in this situation.
Yeah, gotta make sure the shields are down there, because Drew is running out of resources here.
Sure.
So he needs to avoid getting anything hit by a counterspell.
You know, the games where mono red wins will oftentimes be a runaway, but there will also be games like this where you are ahead, but you're barely hanging on. And if things shift back Tyler's way, there's almost no way to get it back.
Exactly. I mean, you have a couple burn spells in the deck, but Drew really with only 4 Stoke the Flames and 2 Searing Bloods, which don't work in this matchup.
Yeah.
So if he fails from here, he could get locked out of the game.
And if a card like Radiant Fountain does show up, it is certainly bad news. It's funny, but gaining 2 life could certainly be a big deal, though Tyler's going to go down to 2 here via Bloodstained Mire. And if he does find a Radiant Fountain, he's able to go up to 4, but that's still Stoke the Flames ring.
Yep. That's why, you know, if we go back a couple turns, I was skeptical of Drew playing the Monastery Swift Spear in lieu of just pumping once with the Dragon's Mantle that he has access to, because the Swift Spear is almost always a point of damage, but the Dragon's Mantle, there's no guarantee you ever get that point of damage back. His creature with Dragon's Mantle was then killed the following turn, and now, you know, we're looking at, does he have enough to finish off this game?
Well, Levin's going to draw a card. He needs a land to get the job done. This is a copy of a Crone Crusader. There is a Dragon's Mantle. That, of course, will trigger, get the token into play. He draws a card. If he finds a land, he can get the job done. All he can do, however, is attack and put Arndt down to 1. Now, Arndt is still in a very bad situation here.
Yeah, this is not bad for Drew. And remember, he still has Stoke in hand. So Tyler's got to beat a lot of different stuff here.
Yeah. At this point, Tyler is trying to fade basically everything in Drew's deck almost.
Yeah.
Creatures are bad news, lands are bad news to be able to cast Stoke. Here's Dig Through Time, though, a very powerful spell. We'll see if he can find what he's looking for.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a mixture of cards at this point because Tyler does not have Drown in Sorrow game 1.
He'll take a look at the top 7. Going to take 2 along with him, negate among the cards that he's looking at. But none of those cards seem all that appetizing at this point.
I suppose if Tyler were to find 2 copies of Bioblight here and had a land to follow up, and then Drew had nothing at all,
yeah,
then maybe he gets untapped.
It's that kind of corner case stuff that it will
Right.
take to get the job done, and he does not have that combination of cards. So Drew Levin is going to win game number 1 here over Tyler Arndt. Mono red aggro up a game over blue black control. As we turn our attention to the sideboard, we will start with Tyler, and of course, when we're taking a look at this sort of sideboard, you're playing against a red deck. The check here for a black control deck is Drown in Sorrow, and there are 4 of those. There are also 3 copies of Ashiok Nightmare Weaver, 2 copies of Empty the Pits, 2 Merciless Executioner, that's the brand new Fleshbag Marauder. There's 2 copies of Thoughtseize, 1 copy of Land of Vest, and then 1 copy of Negate. Some nice options here available, actually.
4 copies of Drown in Sorrow seem great to me, and I think that it's possible Ashiok comes in this matchup as well. I don't think it's impossible. There's a lot of really slow cards in Tyler's deck, and Tyler getting any sort of blockers or even using Ashiok just to gain some life here, I think is not a bad use of resources.
Yeah, I agree. I actually like Ashiok, just a way to lower the curve. Might draw Drew's attention a little bit as well and cause him to play the game in a different fashion. I think that's a pretty nice option as we take a look at Levin's sideboard.
3 copies of Eidolon of the Great Revel, 3 copies of Trumpet Blast, 2 Searing Bloods, 2 Wild Slashes, 2 Lightning Strikes, 2 Arc Lightnings, and a Harness by Force. So all the creature removal that's in Drew's sideboard here has nothing to do with the games that are going on. So To me, the 3 copies of Eidolon, the Great Level, and 3 copies of Trumpet Blast are where you'd want to start here. And the 2 copies of Searing Blood have to come out of Drew's deck in any case. I don't know if he wants to bring in Trumpet Blast because the battle is going to be over sweepers. With that said, the creature enchantment effects, the effects that make Tyler unable to block just aren't very good in this matchup. So I think you're going to see the Eidolons and Trumpet Blasts come in, even though Trumpet Blast comes with some risks.
We'll see if Levin does opt to board in the risky spell in Trumpet Blast here for games 2 and 3, potentially. But while we do wait and you see these players finishing up sideboard, and we will talk about regionals right around the corner here, coming a lot sooner than you think. February 7th is going to be here in just a moment. You can actually play either one of these decks if you're interested in one of our 14 locations.
Absolutely. You can see that the locations are posted here on the map, and they're also available on the website. You can always head over to starcitygames.com/regionals for more information. And keep in mind that the first 200 players to register at each regional site will get this free play map.
It is Squirrel Blade all together. We've got Acorn Mystic, Force of Squirrel, Squirrel Storm, and of course, Squirrel Confidant. As Patrick did say, free exclusive playment to the first 200 players that do head out to Winter Regionals. Plant your flag February 7th. Find out more information, starcitygames.com/regionals. And if you're looking for a budget option that actually looks to be pretty good, take a look at Drew Levin's deck.
Well, in the main deck, there are, I count 4 rares. They are Fire Drinker Satyrs.
A card you love.
A card I do love. I think the most expensive card in the main deck is probably Stoke the Flames.
Oof.
You got 3 Eidolon of the Great Rebels in the sideboard, and those, I don't know, they're probably, I'm guessing $10 or something like that. But you could probably put this together for under 100.
It's a cheapie.
Yeah, it's a cheapie.
And it might be a goodie. Though this will be the test, right? Because now he's up against a very difficult to beat sideboard card in Drown in Sorrow.
Well, what I've always felt my perspective when I'm playing mono red against decks like this is you gotta draw it twice. Like you might get 1 game from it, but game 3 I'm gonna be on the play, and if you don't have it on the 3rd turn, you're probably dead. So yes, it's worrisome. Tyler's prepared for the matchup as much as he can be realistically, but he still needs things to break his way to be able to take the match. And that's why you play decks like mono red here. If you anticipate game 1s are going to be really good for you, you can tolerate having tough post-board matchups because winning game 1 is a huge edge.
It's so easy.
Even if your opponent has a good sideboard for you.
Now, if you're Drew in this situation, it'll be fun to see kind of how he goes about playing the games because, you know, he's playing against a black control deck in blue-black. And so he knows that, okay, Drown Sorrow is certainly on the radar. Now, you don't know how many your opponent's going to have. So will it be this thing where it adjusts the way that he plays the games, or are you just going to say, man, my deck's out to move all in anyway, so I'm just going to play on my threats and hope he doesn't draw it? And, you know, he doesn't know how many the opponent's going to have. You know, in this instance, Tyler does have 4 copies. That's a lot.
Yep. Although this is where we might see some dash cards come into play as well. Mardu Scott and Goblin Heel Cutter, there's 2 copies of each of them in Drew's deck, and those can allow him to, again, add pressure to the board without extending further into sweepers.
And those are the kind of cards I really like in this red deck, and that's what I look for in any aggro deck that I'm playing. Certainly all in aggro decks have their place, but in a situation like this where it gives you some early game play, it gives you some late game play, but also just gives you some flexibility in how you want to line up the game. That's what I like about the mono red deck now. These dash cards, I think, play a huge role.
Alongside Fire Drinker Satyr and Dragon's Mantle, you have ways to deal points of damage without leaving yourself with no resources if your opponent has whatever the card you fear the most.
And we have seen last year quite a bit, even though the format's a little bit different. Drown in Sorrow was in the last standard format as well. We have seen Tom Ross navigate games around that card. It is beatable. Not saying it's not difficult, but it can be done.
I'm interested to see if the dash cards come into play here for a big way for Drew. Does he sculpt the game in such a way where he adds to his board and leaves some dash cards in reserve, try to get the best of both worlds?
Polluted Delta is where Tyler does begin. Levin's going to start off here with a Fire Drinker Satyr. You can see in Arndt's hand he does have a copy of Drown in Sorrow. He's just going to pick up and play an island and pass the turn back. Levin will draw. Picks up a copy of Stoke the Flames. Here's an attack for 2.
And I like Tyler there playing the island instead of the Polluted Delta because he's trying to conceal the possibility of Drown in Sorrow. It may cause Tyler here to say, Drew to say, well, he has to have Drown in Sorrow and untap double black. So it's a small thing, but all this matters if you're in Tyler's perspective. You need to get as much as possible out of this Drown in Sorrow.
Eidolon the Great Revel does join the party now. And this will kind of force Tyler's hand because now this is the kind of card that Levin can play, and he says, I'm not playing anything else.
Yeah. Especially with a Fire Drinker Satyr in play, too. He's got things to do with his mana.
Arndt not willing to pull the trigger on the Drown in Sorrow just yet, looking to get more value out of that card. That could be risky.
This is a very dangerous line of play here from Tyler because, if he has to Drown Sorrow, eventually he's taking some Eidolon triggers if he's using spot removal on other things. Also, if Drew just goes attack you, pump with Fire Drink Crusader, pass the turn, what's your plan from there?
I think that's what the line of play is going to be here, which is attack, pump. I'm not going to dedicate any more resources. What is your plan, as you mentioned? And now Arndt's beginning to move his hand around a little bit because he does have that copy of Bile Blight in his hand. And the thought process here, maybe I'm supposed to cast this. Or am I supposed to wait?
I don't know if Tyler can afford to take this hit. I think he can't just take this hit, untap, and Drown Sorrow. It's way too much damage.
So he's going to sacrifice both of his polluted deltas. He's going to get 2 swamps out of his deck. Eidolon will trigger off the Bile Blight. And a healthy amount of damage is going to be dealt this turn. You add in 2 for the fetch lands, 2 from the Eidolon trigger, and 3 from the Fire Drink Crusader. Arndt's already down to 11.
Yeah, this is very well navigated from Drew here. He sniffed out at least the possibility of a sweeper and is trying to deal as much damage while leaving himself with as many resources in reserve. Very important line to play strategically.
Now keep in mind as well, as Arndt does search up 2 swamps with those deltas, this isn't Modern, this isn't Legacy. You're not getting, Watery Graves or Underground Seas, so your mana is a little bit taxed. Now he does have a second island to play the Dissolves that are in his hand. But again, his mana is, it's going to be tough to maybe do 2 spells in 1 turn now.
It's very challenging. I mean, if he leaves up the Dissolve mana, it means that Drew just gets to go attack you with Fire Drink Crusader. Maybe he pumps, maybe he doesn't, but there's no guarantee you even get to cast the Dissolve. And now you can see the hand that Tyler has here with Perilous Vaults, Dissolves. Tapping out for Perilous Vaults very dangerous for a number of reasons. Sitting on Dissolve is too.
Perilous Vault is going to come down. Tyler going to dare Drew to deal as much damage as he can. So Levin certainly does have some options, and the window is certainly open here. A handful of cards with his opponent at 11. We'll see what he's able to come up with here in this situation. You see 3 copies of Stoke the Flames in his hand. The Vault is the card that really does hold this blue-black deck together, a way to take care of just problematic permanents. And oftentimes is the case, they just play it on turn number 4, they sweep everything up turn number 5, and they've got other mana available to counter spells, cast Dig Through Time, and everything else. But playing against this low-to-the-ground red deck, Levin's going to make his move. He's going to play a Monastery Swiftspear, a Dragon's Mantle. Looks like he's going to go even a little bit deeper here. Perhaps it's time for a Hammer Hand, and it is. And all this is doing is triggering the Swiftspear to get as much damage as he can get across.
Well, also what this does is now gives Drew a 3 toughness creature in play.
Shutting off, forcing the Vault to be the play instead of Drown Sorrow.
Exactly.
Sure.
And Tyler doesn't even have land number 5.
Well, that's a big problem.
So this has been a very impressive game here from Drew.
Now here is Drown Sorrow, but Drown Sorrow is only going to take care of the old Fire Drink Crusader. You see Tyler maybe thinking it was going to take care of the Swiftspear, but Swiftspear has additional toughness thanks to Hammer Hand.
Yep.
You can see Tyler's hand. He's got Counter Magic. He's got a Perilous Vault in play, but none of that matters right now. Right now, he's not on the board. Now, and Drew doesn't have to worry about a card. He doesn't have to worry about a card like Murderous Cut because Black Mana is not available. And that is going to very simply get the job done. Drew Levin is going to win this match here over Tyler Arndt. 2-0. Mono Red Aggro will take care of, Blue-Eye Control for Drowning Sorrows. Not a problem for the red deck. Impressive stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, Drew played that game extremely well. And I think that it would have been very easy after Tyler passed on turn number 3 to say, well, he just doesn't have Drowning Sorrow. Drew still respected the possibility. Tyler was trying to get as much as possible out of that Drowning Sorrow. Drew didn't bite, and Tyler ended up dying with multiple Dissolves in hand, a Drowning Sorrow that only killed 1 thing, a Perilous Vault he couldn't activate, and Drew with 4 or 5 live cards left in his hand. Just very impressive stuff.
We know one thing about the red decks is that's exactly how you draw it up. You want to leave the opponent with the cards in the hand. You want to leave them with Dissolve and a Perilous Vault that they didn't get to use because they didn't have time, not the opportunity to use all those resources.
Exactly, and it's one of those things where if you ever slip up once and let them get an awesome Drowning Sorrow off, or you spend your entire turn doing something critical and it gets hit with Dissolve, the door's shut. You're never getting another shot at it.